So I'm very excited today to introduce our next speaker in the Department of Psychology Stepping Stones video series. And today I'm joined by Dr. Vonetta Dotson, who is going to tell us a little bit about her path and to answer the questions that we've posed to our other faculty members in this video series. And so first, Dr. Dotson, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. And I'll just let you kind of start this off by telling us a little bit about yourself and about some of the research that you do.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for having me. It's fun to do this kind of thing for sure. And I'm glad that you all are doing this series within the department. So I am a clinical neuropsychologist. I'm in the clinical neuropsychology concentration in the psychology department at Georgia State. I'm also in the cognitive and affective neuroscience concentration because my work is really at that intersection of neuropsychology and cognitive and affective neuroscience. So my work mostly focuses on understanding how cognitive and brain aging is modified in both positive and negative ways by psychological factors, environmental exposures, and other lifestyle behaviors. So for example, I do a lot of work, most of my work has looked at how depression interacts with cognitive and brain aging and leads to risk for dementia. But I also look at positive things such as how exercise and other healthy behaviors can help protect the brain, protect you from depression, and also reduce your risk for cognitive decline as you get older. More recently, my lab has started to focus on health disparities because for a lot of these healthy behaviors that we suggest, they're harder for different groups to have access to. There's some cultural reasons why people sometimes are more reluctant to change their behaviors. And then of course, there are health disparities in some of the medical risk factors for brain health as well.
Great, thank you for that. So the way that we're sort of starting this off with everyone is just asking them about their journey, as we call it, the sort of stepping stones that they've taken, and you can go back as far as you want in your educational past to high school or undergrad, wherever you want to start, and then just tell our viewers kind of how you got to where you are today, and maybe some of the highlight and low light points along the way that you know sort of helped you find your path to where you are at this point.
Okay, so I'm going to start when I was 13 because I knew when I was 13 that I wanted to, in my mind, be a counselor or help people. And I wasn't really sure what that meant. So I remember talking to my grandmother, who was a nurse. And so since she was involved in the medical field, explained to me the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And so I said, okay, I want to go the psychology route because I want to do more helping people, talking through things and change their behaviors in their life. And I literally never changed my mind after age 13 about what I wanted to do. So when I got into undergraduate, I still wasn't sure within psychology what I wanted to do, and actually didn't really know a lot about the different types of psychologists. And then my junior year, I took a physiological psychology course. I will never forget reading the chapter about the brain and just thinking, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing I've ever learned about. This is so fascinating. And I want to know more. I want to learn more. And I want to make this part of my career. So I was really fortunate that I had a professor who was a neuropsychologist. And so when I went to her and said, I'm getting so excited about this, you know, how can I make this part of my career? She said, oh, you should go into neuropsychology. And I said, what's that? I had no idea. I just knew that I wanted to be a psychologist who would study the brain. And so she was really great at directing me about what the field is, suggesting that I get involved in research, which again, at that point in my junior year, no one had told me that before, which is kind of remarkable when I think about that. But she was really instrumental in getting me connected to a research lab where I volunteered and then later got hired as a research assistant. And that sort of sealed the deal. I was doing neuroimaging research, looking at depression, looking at cognitive functioning, and it just made me that much more excited. So I knew at that point I wanted to go into neuropsychology. I was University of Florida, which is a really great neuropsychology program that I was excited to sort of get my feet really into the field. And during graduate school, I discovered that not only do I love the brain, but I love the aging brain. I love the idea of understanding how throughout our lifespan, our brain changes and how even as we get older, we can still retain that ability to regenerate and to grow, and neuroplasticity is still a thing as you get older, despite some of the old stereotypes that you can't teach a dog new tricks, but actually you can. Even as you get older, you can exercise and literally increase the volumes of certain brain regions and things like that that are just fascinating to me. So the aging part sort of came in later as I was studying depression and realizing that there are interesting differences between young people and older people with depression in terms of what happens to their brain and cognitive functioning. So that intersection, having these sort of double vulnerabilities, is something that I've sort of carried with me in different ways. And again, now it's come to double vulnerability being intersections of diversity, so older ethnic minorities, for example. So I find that fascinating to just try to understand and do something about different groups of people who have sort of extra vulnerabilities. So that was a bit off topic, but going back to graduate school, then I went on to do my internship and postdoctoral fellowship. My fellowship was at the National Institute on Aging in one of their intramural labs. I had 3 years of doing nothing but research and finding it completely fascinating, doing longitudinal studies, learning different methods, really just getting immersed in research more than I had before. And prior to that, I wasn't sure if I was going to go the more clinical route or more research route. And so after doing internship, which was all clinical and loving it, and then doing postdoc, which was all research and loving it, I said, well, I'm just going to be busy forever because I have to do both. And so at that point, I just said, okay, this is going to be my life. I'm going to be doing all of it. And that has brought me to where I am now, which is doing this combination of research, clinical work, teaching. I did it for 7 years at University of Florida as faculty, and then I joined the faculty here at Georgia State in 2017, and the rest is history, as they say.
Well, so I mean, it sounds like you, as you mentioned, from 13, you've kind of known exactly where you wanted to get to, but along the way, as you were making your way through your graduate program, or maybe even in the early part of your career, is there a certain piece of advice or something that you wish someone had told you that you'd be happy to share with current graduate students, or maybe undergrads that are thinking about grad school, or even that early career person? Just some, just pearl of wisdom that you just are like, in hindsight, you're like, oh, I wish someone had told me that, would have made it such an easier path to get here.
Yeah, there's probably a few different things. One that maybe people don't always think of that I'll mention is that I wish that someone had kind of highlighted to me earlier in the process how important networking is. And again, it sounds basic, but it is career changing. And I think I had a good demonstration of that myself when it was really the first couple years of being a faculty member at that point at University of Florida, where I started more actively going to smaller workshops where you could really meet people and talk with them, not just going to conferences and sitting in the back of the room and not saying much, but getting to know other people in the field. That it just opened up so many opportunities for collaborations, for just learning about different projects that were happening. For me, leading up to, at that point, going up for tenure, even just thinking of letter writers, it dawned on me how, wow, I'm so glad I spent the last few years really thinking about this, because I have people I can think of who know me enough to be able to write these letters, even if I haven't done any direct research with them. So that's getting a little bit ahead of people who are grad students or undergrads or early career. But I would say that we do team science. And so to do that and to really build that repertoire of work you can do, you want to connect with people locally within your university, and also just nationally and even internationally, by really not just going to, but participating in and being engaged in conferences and workshops and other opportunities to connect with people in the field. It really has changed my career, and I started that process a bit later than I wish I would have.
Mm-hmm. So kind of along the same lines, we're thinking about and we're sharing some of the challenges that we each faced along the way, so that others that watch these videos may recognize in our paths things that they're currently facing, and understand that it's not unique to them and that they can overcome those. So is there a particular challenge you faced, again, in the early part of your career, graduate school, maybe, that you would share, and talk just a little bit about how you got through that?
Mm-hmm. So again, I think we all have had multiple challenges. So maybe to focus on one, I think that I had a challenge that many of us do, which is that you're thinking so far ahead, mostly out of anxiety about what you need to do, that sometimes I think that affects decisions in sort of a bad way. And so what I mean by that, for example, is my very first semester as a faculty member, I wrote an R1 application, which I don't know, anyone who's written R1 knows it's kind crazy. Like you don't write R1 in like 2 or 3 months, and you certainly don't do it with, at that time I had such a small group of kind of people on my team within that grant. And that's just not, that was me thinking, oh my gosh, I need to get an R1 for a tenure. And I had 6 years to get the R1. I actually think that I got thrown off by trying to jump too soon to that, as opposed to doing some of the steps that make more sense developmentally to get to that point of being able to have a really competitive grant. And so of course what happens, I get demoralized because I just get these, scathing reviews, and that's counterproductive. I think thinking about one step at a time, knowing where you want to go long term, but then taking smaller steps is a much better way. And I think I kind of learned that the hard way. And then I took much more of a, okay, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. I can't get to the end right
Mm-hmm.
now. So let me pull back and just think about, increments. Like what do I need to get done in the next 3 years? Okay, now I'll break that down into years. Okay, now break that down into semesters. And that just became much more manageable than what I was doing, which was jumping to what I saw as being the end point. So that would probably won't be one of the initial challenges that I faced.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too. It's something that we see in research, but also even just in our teaching early in our careers, right? Where we're trying to prep out our whole semester in like the first week, and you
Yeah.
realize, learn from your students, learn from your style, adjust as you go, and accomplish, be good at the end of the semester, and find your way there as you learn how to teach either a new course, or maybe if it's, the very first semester that you're teaching as a faculty member.
Absolutely.
So my next question to you is one in which we're sort of posing to everyone that at a point in which they really were faced with some adversity in graduate school, or again maybe early in your career post PhD, was there a particular person or a group of people, maybe a mentor or folks in your cohort that kind of helped see you through? And would you share a little bit sort of their impact? And you could name them specifically you want, or you could just point out, what sort of person it was that kind of got you through.
hmm
Just thinking about, all of the ways in which, as you mentioned, we don't do science alone. We don't do this alone. We have other people around us that support us and that make us stronger. And so we're just sort of sharing maybe one story that would illustrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, my biggest person, certainly in the earlier part of my career, was the person who I call my mentor, Michael Marciska. He was the co-chair of my dissertation committee. He's a well-known cognitive aging researcher, and I don't know if I would have made it through graduate school without him, not to be dramatic, but that's how much, just when things always come up. And so there's always things that are difficult and challenging. He was the person who I could literally email him at 11 o'clock at night and he would write back 5 minutes later. And he has remained that person throughout my career. So every career choice I've made, he's been the person who I contact. One story I'll tell about him and just how amazing he is. So when I was applying for my postdoc, I applied to a few different places. I was fortunate to have multiple offers, and I was trying to figure out how to turn down offers without burning bridges, because I knew that for some of the people, they were going to be people who I would want to have connected to me career-wise. And
Mm-hmm.
so I sent him an email and I said, I'm trying to figure out what to do because, again, good problem to have, but I got more hits than I thought I was going to. And so how do I manage this? So maybe an hour later, I get back an email from him and he says, well, it's up to you, but I might write something like this. And so he writes me 3 different emails. He writes out the whole thing of what he would say and then says, but you can use whatever you want to do. And I'm thinking, who spends the time to write this? Like, because he had 3 different scenarios, if it's a postdoc in the same city that you took an offer in, if it's a postdoc in a different city, just different kind of, and I was just thinking, this is amazing mentorship when someone will spend this amount of time trying to just really completely show you, hey, I know this is a
Mm-hmm.
sensitive issue, here's how I would do it. That to me is way above and beyond, and just an example of his availability. And I think having that support, and even if I didn't need to call on him, just knowing that I had someone who would have that way was incredibly helpful as I went throughout, particularly the early career.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, that sounds very supportive.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're to our last question, and this is our fun one. And this is your opportunity to share with the viewers a word or a phrase or a concept that you came across maybe for the first time when you were in graduate school that everyone else around you seemed to understand and already had heard about? And so the way that we're phrasing this is, what is that word or phrase that when you heard it the first few times, you just kind of lowered your head and tried to stay as small as possible until you had the chance to go look up what it was that everybody else seemed to know?
Yeah, so that's such a fun question, and I feel like my answer is not that fun, but I'll tell you. So for me, what I thought of right away is that in clinical psychology, the national licensing exam is called the EPPP, and people call it that. And so people kept saying EPPP, EPPP, EPPP. I'm like, what is that? I'm like, I don't know. Is that like a course that you take, or is it like I had no idea. And so I don't think I knew what it was until my internship year, which is really sad because I was actually going up for EPPP within like a year of that, because I never wanted to ask anyone and I never thought to look it up at the right time. So that's just, again, sort of random. It's a very clinical psychology specific thing, but it's one of those you don't want to admit that you don't know it because everyone else just sort of assumed that, of course, you know what that is. I'll also add that aside from like terms or words, for me, what I found intimidating is that people brought up all these names of like pioneers in the field. And I was definitely faking it until I made it when it came to that, because they'd be like, oh yeah, so and so's great. And I'm thinking, who is that? Write this down. Let me go look them up and see who they are so that next time I can actually add something to it. Just the name situation. I always told myself, I'm not going to do all this name dropping because it made me so intimidated. And of course, what do I do now? I'm constantly bringing all these names of people because it's hard not to, because some people are just so tied to certain topics that it comes up all the time. So I at least try to give my students a context and say, oh, if you don't know this person, this is what they do, so that they're not hiding their head in shame the way that I did.
Yeah, those are actually great examples. The acronyms too. The acronyms get tossed around a lot, and whether it's for societies or it's for tests or for things like that. And I remember a couple of other examples just from my grad training too, where I was like, I have to go look that up. I don't know if I was supposed to know that or why everybody else knows it, but yeah, those make for good moments to sort of bring us back down to earth if we're feeling a little overconfident. And also hearing that everybody has some of those makes me feel, should make the viewers feel, and certainly makes me feel better about like thinking back to that time and saying, for me, it was the word orthogonal. I was like, I just heard the word orthogonal and I thought, just stay quiet, keep your head down, just get out of class. And as soon as you get home, you can look that one up and figure out what the heck everybody has been talking about.
That's a good one. I know that came up with me too. So now that you say that, that reminds me. I'm sure there's plenty of examples that I just can't think of all of them. And you mentioned abbreviations, so I'll also add that it's not just early in your career. I'm going through that again right now because for the past year, I've been doing work with NASA, and every government organization has so many abbreviations. I am constantly trying to write down, and people are talking quickly, and I'm in these meetings, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm so glad I don't have my camera on, because they don't see that I'm like Googling everything they're saying. So like, I don't know what you're talking about. So there are a ton of abbreviations, and I feel like I'm starting over again because of being in a new setting.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk with you, and it certainly was a nice opportunity to share again with our viewers some ideas about your career and how you got to where you are, and also to reassure people that if acronyms freak them out, they freak the rest of us out too. And just keep your head down until you can find a chance to go look them up, and then you'll always remember them after you've looked them up once. Like, I think that's the other take-home message.
Yes.
So thank you, Dr. Dotson, so much, and we appreciate your time. And to our viewers, I hope you enjoy the video. Thank you.